So Purushottama Bilimoria is an expert for Indian and cross-cultural philosophy, philosophy of religion, and critical thinking. He's the lead scientist of the Purushottama Center for Study of Indian Philosophy and Culture at People's Friendship University of Russia. He's also a senior fellow at the University of Belmore, a fellow at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, the co-founder of the Australasian Society for Asia and Comparative Philosophy, co-editor-in-chief of Sophia, and associate editor of the Journal of Dharma Studies. His recent publications include A History of Indian Philosophy, Routledge, 2019, Religion in Sustainability, Springer, 2021, Contemplative Studies and Hinduism, Routledge, 2021, and Indian Ethics, Volume 2, Routledge, 2023. He also teaches at California State University, and periodically at the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Belmont. So the title of this talk is Gods and Godless Divinity. And there is a subtitle, which is Polyphony and Panpsychic Omniscience Effervescent and Hermaphrodite Devatas in Indian Philosophy of Religion. I hope I got it right. So Purushottama, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Namaskar, everyone. Greetings. Obrigado. Could I share the screen? Could you let me share the screen?
Sure, just 1 minute.
You make me the host.
I will do it. Okay, see if you can see the button now. Can you see it?
Oh my God. PowerPoint. Share. Is the PowerPoint coming up? Jesus. Okay.
So I ask everyone to unmute your mic, okay? Except the speaker, of course.
So, why is my PowerPoint not showing?
Can you see the share screen button?
Yeah, I see the share screen, and I'm trying to share the screen, but I'm not quite sure why my screen is not sharing.
Okay.
There's some problem with. I sent it to Gabriel.
Me.
Can he?
Yeah, send it to me. You can send it to me, and you can start talking.
I will share with you, Ricardo, right now.
Okay, so you can do it.
You have it.
You can do then, Gabriel. Okay, I'm gonna make you co-host, and you can just share. Okay. Okay, so Gabriel is gonna take care of it. If you wish, you can start. You can start speaking. Up to you.
But it should. There's a different screen keeps coming up asking me to join the meeting, but I thought I have already joined the meeting through the browser. Oh, it's because I've joined via the browser. It's not letting me share my screen for some reason.
Okay, Gabriel.
Well, I'm saying, oh, can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
You can see my slides, right?
Yes. You have just to let Gabriel know that you want to go to the next slide, okay?
So Gabriel, okay, so you could make it full screen now if you like. Right, okay. Okay, I'll just start and Gabriel can move the screen. So this seminar we've been invited to participate and contribute has been titled Indian Religions and the Concept of God. But I'm left wondering, are we supposing there is the concept of God, or many concepts of God, or no concept as such of God, right? Well, I wish to take up the Heideggerian doubt about the missing God brought to me by the Mimamsa Hermes and problematize the trope before we settle back in our gaddis, in our chairs, and become complacent and take it for granted. But some might retort, well, just walk around India and even the Hindu and maybe Jain temples in the diaspora, and you will see people worshiping. Granted, but hold on. Are they worshiping the concept of God, or one God, or many gods, or many kinds of divinities that may not in the strict sense count as God, deity, transcendent being, much less monotheistically conceived supreme omnigod? So this is an exploration. Just where did God, or the idea of God in the later sense, come from? Can we get the answers from historical, philosophical, theological, textual, anthropological, or history of religions inquiries? I should like to draw on a little from each of these modalities to feel my own mental angst over this question. Apropos, in philosophy of religion, in the conventional sense, in the Western sense, it is the standard thing to begin with the question, does God exist? And if so, what is God's nature? Only recently have people paused to wonder whether the concept of God that we're dealing with, what is the concept of God that we're dealing with? It seems to be so Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian, Islamic laden, but would seem utterly out of place in, say, the native or Aboriginal religion, where the serpent spirit is the highest kind of being they have in spirituality. And that too, couched in mythological legends. Same goes for theodicy, or the problem of evil. Why did God allow evil and so forth? And it ends up that God wins in most of these arguments. But the concept of the kind of being argued for or against, the argument is itself already predisposed. It's already in the, I haven't started the slide yet. It's already in the premises. So did such God exist in the minds of the Indians from the very beginning, or in their religious beliefs, their theologies, or their philosophies? So that ought to be the question. If it turns out that at the end of the day, the Indians of Indian history of religions and ideas did not have, or perhaps even needed, the concept of God, then we should call it quits. And since I believe this is to be the case, I should shut up and call it the day. It's very early morning here. That's why I'm having some technical issues. Maybe not, for you will not be persuaded until I present an argument and evidence to support my contention. Well, hang on to your seats, and here we go. So I'll use mostly slides. So the first slide, please, right? The one after that. So in the Indus Valley civilization, there was mainly an urban culture sustained by surplus agricultural productions and commerce. The latter including trade with Persia, Iran, Sumer in southern hemisphere, in southern Mesopotamia and into Egypt, dates back to about 10,000 to 2000 BCE. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, major city civilizations and territorial expansions, covered present-day Pakistan up to Gujarat. Very earthly, agrarian, down-to-earth folks apparently relate to or from whom descended Dravidic people, Dravidians of the South India, possibly called the Dasus or Dasyus in the literature later on. They seem to be nature worshippers, as the seals unearthed seem to suggest. Definite images of Mother Goddess, but also phallic-like male figures with headgear of animals or aliens. Next slide. Next slide, please. So here they are, some of the images from Indus Valley. Next slide, please. Right. Just keep going. Here's a woman worshiping a very godlike, but we don't know whether these are animal forms or some alien symbolism that's going on. Okay, next. If I say, right. So it is said that severe droughts led to the decline of their habitats, or that they were pushed south and southwest. However, remnants of the culture of nature worship, plus the mother, likened to earth, as the major spirit protector, survived and got passed on to revivalist hybrid traditions in post Vedic India. Okay. Next slide. Then came. So there is a green line that's sort of hanging over the. Okay, good. Then came the Aryans, populated territories and possibly armed with Sanskrit, and at least the Rig Veda, the Rig Veda being the first of the Vedas, continued to compose other Vedas through to the Upanishads. This is the beginnings of the Brahmanic, I call it the deontology, like Deus in plural, deontology, avoiding the use of theology. Okay, I don't know if Gabriel can see my finger, but when I see the finger, do the finger, it means the next slide. Okay, so good, thank you.
I'm sorry, I can see you. I can see you because I'm sharing this live.
You can see my finger. Okay, so a comment. So then, in the beginning was neither non-existence nor existence. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here is the what's called the Nashadiya Shukta. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning with no distinguishing sign. All this was water, the life force that was covered with emptiness, that one arose through the power of heat. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of time. Poets seeking in their heart with wisdom found the bond of existence in non-existence. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim whence was it produced? Hence is this creation. Whence is this creation? The gods came afterwards with the creation of the universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. This is probably the first primal eruption, the Big Bang theory. The hymn seems to question the very ground of existence itself. The poet wonders what was there in the beginning when there was neither existence nor non-existence, and sums up with a critical remark that perhaps we would never know how and why of the world coming to be. The hymn may well capture the earliest expressions of a skeptical tendency in regards to the ultimate questions of the nature of the world, or the ultimates, that looms large within the Indian tradition as part of the philosophical conscience. It at least states that existence appears to be problematic. There is a non-intelligible residue at the root of our experience, which no inquiry may be able to answer. The idea of non-existence, asat, literally non-existent, is taken up again and again in later literature, and even made the impersonal ground of sat, of existence itself. This is important, for the Rig Veda Shia has by no means committed himself to the facticity of existence or any existence. Imagine what it would have been like if there was really no existence of any kind at all, and how out of non-existence anything would have arisen. A line in the hymn might suggest an answer. The poets found the bond of existence in non-existence, which implies that something can come out of nothing. There are modern philosophers of science like Quinton Smith and cosmologists who are quite comfortable with this possibility, or like Graham Opie, have no difficulty with accepting infinite iterations and similitude of our tiny little cosmos, rejecting the Aristotelian, later developed in Aquinas, thesis of the first unmoved mover. Contemporaneously, in India, the Nyaya model for a teleological, cosmological, logical argument for Ishvara came about. How such great logicians like Gangesha were lured into defending a theory that took very little effort on the part of the skeptical Mimamsa and the dialectical Buddhist and the Charvakas to tear it apart. This is long before Kant and Hume set to dismantle this same argument. This is a sane philosopher's nightmare. So what are we saying? Not satisfied with non-existence, of course, the Aryans had to perform elaborate sacrifices and reap the fruits of their ritual effort. They invented somewhere out of India a plethora of deities, devas, devatas, divinities, powers of nature, whatever you like to call them, basically uniconic, so that we are left at guessing their sex or sexual orientation. Next slide, please. Or as the linguistically designated gender tells us nothing about the former, as any gender non-binary child in California school will tell you that. But then one might ask, what about all the other hymns in the Vedas? the Purushottama, Hiranyagarbha, the egg god, and so forth. Well, to be sure, subsequent hymns attempt to answer a prominent one, of which relates the process of creation to the cosmogonic myth of the golden egg. But before that comes the Purusha Shukta. Here, the man, the Purusha, is said to have 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet. He pervaded the earth on all sides and extended beyond it as far as 10 fingers. With the sacrifice, the gods sacrificed to sacrifice. These were the first ritual laws. These very powers reached the dome of the sky where dwell the ancient gods. Above this world is 3/4 of Purusha, transcending the world of manifestation. But the quarter, just the quarter, which is in this world, appears again and again, is regenerative. And from that is born beings that take food. The animate ones don't take food, whom gods worship with yajna, sacrifice. The learned one who knows that Purusha, whom the creator considered as one before him. So even the creator comes after. And this has semblances to the polytheistic panentheism rather, of Plato's Timaeus and later Neoplatonists like Plutarch. In Timaeus, if you remember, the demiurge actually creates a creator god, and the gods come after. Next slide, please. So you have here a polyphony of barely iconographed deities. How can one personify elements and nature's forces? No wonder Orientalists like Max Muller and Oldenburg called the Vedic text insane babblings of primeval religious instincts or sheer nonsensical magic. Hegel thought that nature had not yet infused with thought and the Geist, and that it might take a long while before the Indians actually catch up, or the Geist catches up with India. R.C. Zainer thought that the clear signs of preternaturalism of the Aboriginal people were reflected in the Vedic tradition too, but not yet a civilized religious race. And they're not even moved to the Saina monoism, which comes with, for him, Vedanta, let alone monotheism, which will evolve into, the tradition will evolve into by dint of historicism, of the historical progression of theological ideas, and culminates in the Bhagavad Gita for him. But you can see the images are, you have half animal, half human beings. It's very difficult. So that's why it was iconic. They dwelt mostly in mantras. Another hymn here has the cosmic egg, the golden egg, that rents apart into two crusts, one outer, one inner, one becoming the sky and the other earth, while the yolk is the sun, signifying the three worlds. Another hymn tells of the floating cosmic egg giving birth to its own progenitor, Prajapati, a supreme god and demiurge, who then sets about creating the worlds and an animate and inanimate thing. Right? One interpretation of this symbolism is that it reflects an anthropomorphic extension of the normal human procreative or regenerative process from which the ideas of implanting the seed in the womb and birth are taken. Immense importance is given here to the cosmic order and to the gods, who appear to control the destiny of nature and human beings alike. Now, that of course, then of course, going back to the Purusha Shukta, here you again, the idea is actually more that sacrifice creates anything. It's not that the gods actually create anything. If the gods, as we said in the earlier Shukta, they come later. So the Purusha is the cosmic person who is dismembered, and parts of his body constitute the universe and its furniture, as is the closest that you get to the idea of creation. I'm talking about the early Hindu tradition, or the Brahmanic tradition. The idea resembles more the ancient Indo-European and Babylonian myths of the cosmos as an effect of the dismembered body of the gods and animals than it does to the view of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, in the rather literalist reading of the biblical Genesis. So, but again, none of these are to be taken literally. They are symbolic, metaphoric, more to do with sacrifice, as I said. Frankly, a personal being, Purusha, is not needed, which is why I am a persona non grata for bearing the same name. Prajapati felt lonely and so created a daughter who he desired to have union with, but ended up with Erectus Interruptus and from the spilled oats were born various furnitures that populate the universe, including ourselves. So this was the sort of the beginning. But then the Upanishads come along and they turn the table around, and they ask, how can something come out of nothing? There must be something. So there then it evolves the idea of Brahman, the idea of looking for the unity, something that might actually make for one. And Brahman, the term comes from a prayer maker, mantra, so forth. In the later Upanishads, or the middle Upanishads, you get the idea of Isha, Ishvara, Sveta Ishvara, and so on, the one who envelopes and breathes into the whole universe. Or is it at the center of the onion-like peels that concentrically make up the universe, or the spider, as Voltaire noted, that weaves out of the web the universe from its seminal fluid. So here you can see that it's actually next slide, please. It's very much like the in a moment I'll tell. So meanwhile, the Mimamsakas are actually talking about the gods who are effervescent. They only come up in mantras, they reside in mantras, they deliver the fruits, and then they go away. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So what's happening is more and more of the idea of the Sat is actually developed, is actually built into the devas themselves, into the ideas of the deities, but they're still connected with sacrifice. This is why you see next slide, please. Yeah. Sorry. Next. Okay, one more slide. The one about Plotinus. It's a pity that I don't have control over the slide, so I can't. Okay, one more. Yeah. So this one. So here you have this is a drawing from actually Plotinus is the one, and then there's the nuance that emanates from that, and then the world soul, which actually you could call God, and then the individual soul, Atman, and so on, and the physical universe. This is no different in a way from the way in which Brahman is conceived in the Upanishads, at least. In later Vedanta and so forth, things were a little different, but here you can actually see almost a resemblance. Now, was Plotinus influenced by the Upanishads, or we don't know, possibly quite. But I think the picture is actually quite good. Can we go back a couple of slides to the incomes Buddhism? One after that. So I want to claim that actually a Buddha comes along, and he, of course, develops this whole almost Heraclitean idea of flux, which is adopted against materialist objections to permanence and the efficacy of action. I'm going to cut this short because we're running out of time with it. But certain things remain unconditioned. Nirvana, Dharmakaya, and the Four Noble Truths. The Dharmakaya does not dissolve but ascends to the realm of Brahma, which is equated with the Mahapurusha of the Vedas, gradually surpasses that and is elevated with by the time of Buddha Ghosha further to the Tathagata. The Tathagata is then transformed into the Avalokiteshvara that emerges also. So you have on the left side here Panipadma, but it's actually the Buddha Amitabha of infinite light, Adi Buddha, Pitamaha, that after Ashoka's reign from late 4th to the 5th century becomes with Asanga, plotting the one consciousness, the intelligence that the Yogacharas were looking for as the supreme being, as the supreme. They found that not in the emptiness of the world, but in the higher realm of mind only. That is the Buddha. That is his Dharmakaya, and there's nothing more divine than that. Emptiness is not divinity, nor is the divine empty. The first iconic representations of the Buddha in Ajanta, shortly after the Greek aesthetic embellishments, hits quite big times, and they import iconography into James, which then gets developed in the Brahmanic traditions as well. So my claim is that the first idea of a divine, of an iconic representation of a supreme sort of personal intelligence actually comes up with Buddhism. It's not there originally in the Brahminic tradition. Next slide, please. And they import the idea of omniscience to Jainism as well. So by the time Buddhism gets to China, you get you get Tara, you get Kuan Yi with many arms and so forth. So the Buddha is feminized, basically. You've got a feminine divinity. By the time it gets to Tibet, Buddha is seated there, right in the center of all the gods in the entire universe. And it's from them that the idea, next slide, please, the idea of omniscience. Remember, Mimamsakas argued against Buddha's omniscience. Why? Because it was going to be a threat to all ideas of the deities that were not omniscient in the Hindu tradition. They fought amongst themselves. They had limited powers and so forth. The idea of omniscience is then invented into that was the stage of Vajrayana. Yes, well, that's true too. But the seminal ideas were there in the Mahavastu. It was in the Pali tradition. So you have the Jain Tirthankara are projected as effervescent, individually omniscient, godlike panenpsychism. I'm calling it panenpsychism rather than panentheism, because it's not a theist, it's one individual consciousness. This divine beings of sort, otherwise Jainism, like Buddhism, is godless, but no one takes the place of the Buddha as the sole ascended supremely divine being in Jainism. So they're not a threat to polytheistic Brahmanism. Next slide, please. Next one, we've dealt with it. So here in the Upanishads during the medieval Kashmir Saivism period, Utpaladeva Abhinavagupta to Alvars in Tamil Nadu, precursors to Southern Vaishnavism, and on to Ramanuja, and right down to perhaps Aurobindo as well, bear resemblances to panentheism and pantheism that develops post-Brahmanism and informed by theisms in the Puranas and the Bhagavata traditions across the spectrum, echoes also in the epics, and on the way to becoming monotheism, right? Which means you can have one God who becomes supreme, then another God can become supreme, but there's at least one personal supreme being. But this panentheism that you see here as very easily, I don't want to deal with chats right now, and I hope that I don't think this is the time to actually throw in anything in the chats. Please, it's distracting. Here you have panentheism, which is almost like the sort of Ramanujan idea. You have the infinite outside, if you like, the divine, and the world inside. In pantheism, you have both the infinite or the divine and the finite as one. Spinoza, of course, naturalizes the thing, gets rid of the infinite, gets rid of divine, and the divinity becomes a much more naturalized, which is kind of thing that I think one might sort of eventually find in some parts of Hindu tradition as well. But this whole idea of panentheism, of the sort of the Brahman being above and the God being part of the world. So if the God is divine as well, right? But you could also have a God within here, but the outer could be just Brahman, could be just concept, which is probably why Shankara has the two-tiered idea. He has the Kutushtha and Tatastha. So you have the primary definition, secondary definition. Ishvara comes secondary, but he tends to reject the idea of God as being the ultimate or totally identified with Brahman. Our Atman is much more identified than God is. My brother Staneshwar will probably tell you a slightly different story about this, but that is for debate later on. It wasn't until sort of Madhusudana Saraswati and the Shringeri Kamakoti gurus that the idea of God to be worshipped within Advaita Vedanta comes about. But there again, it's actually the feminine, the Sharada and Bharati and Saraswati that actually reign supreme. But that's I don't want to get bogged down into Vedanta. All I want to say here is that eventually, with the philosophical schools, in Nyaya, there is no God in the beginning, comes later. Vaisheshika, there is no God, comes later. Sankhya never admits God. Yoga, God is like a guru person to be worshipped and so forth. Ishta Devata, if you like, but just a guru, really, ultimately. Mimamsa never has gods. Okay, so I'll just now go to my conclusion. Can we get through a few more? I'm going to have to take 5 more minutes because of this technical difficulty, Ricardo. Next slide, please. So there you are. Then it's after the Buddhists have ideas of the icon of supreme, you get Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva coming up in the Hindu tradition. And I deliberately use this picture because it doesn't have the kind of iconography that we later on get, and they all have consorts as well. Next slide, please. Right. Okay, and then here you have the sculptures from Khajuraho and so forth. Later, Hegel was to deride the polymorphic, perfidiously voluptuous, perverse deities of Brahmanism in somnambulist wonder. Brahman is just nature or abstract, so concept with no substantiality to do or evolve towards guides to self-actualization in historical reality. Next slide, please. So, and then you have, of course, the Ardhanari, the hermaphrodite versions of gods evolving in the Hindu tradition as well. So I'm just going to go through the slides and come to my conclusion. Next one, please. And then you of course have Vishnu, who's here now personified as the pantheistic God. He's sleeping, impassibility. Nothing of the world actually affects the God in a pantheistic picture. Nothing affects Vishnu whatsoever. He sleeps away, leaves it to Brahman to do the job that Plato's demiurge does. But there, the demiurge creates the world God, and the gods as in the Nasadiya cum Purushottama. Next slide, please. And you get non-personal representation as well. And then you get the feminine coming up, Kali as the supreme God. Kali, who then cuts, can cut her head as well, the Chinnamaster. Next one, please. Right. I want to get to the end of the slide. So again, the half male, half female gods. Next one, please. Yeah, you can keep going. So here, Mohini is Vishnu, born as damsel to lure Shiva away from his supremacy. This is gender bending of divinities. Next one. Then you have Ganesh. Ganesh, who has a consort, he's an elephant, elephant image. Here you have Ganesh as Ardhanari, icon of Ganesh, entirely hermaphrodite image. This is actually a contemporary sculpture from Cholamangal by K.N. Gopal. Next one in Tamil Nadu. Then you have the Das avatars. The avatars, you can see they begin with animal forms, the Kumar, fish and tortoise and so on. And of course, later on, Buddha is incorporated as well. Well, why? Because Buddha had already attained a divine status in the broader Indian tradition, half lion and so forth. And the last one, Kalki, here, of course, is depicted as riding on a horse, but is also imaged as half man, half horse, a bit like the last of the things in the Revelations. Next one. And then you have images that are barely personal, barely personal, as I say, unlike Venkateshwar or image on top, which is very personal. These are alien, probably representation of the kind of devatas that Mimamsakas had earlier on. Next slide, right. Go on. Then you get the Hanuman, of course, again, incorporates all the kind of animal avataric forms into himself. In the diaspora, the temples depict the epic gods, Rama, Sita, Lakshmana, Krishna, Radha, Rukmani, Durga, Shiva, Vishnu, Hanuman, and so forth. This is all over the diaspora. Next one, please. Okay, next one. And then you have the, no, one before that. The problematic gender of Ayyappan down in Kerala, most likely hermaphroditic. Then if 21st century populist Devi were depicted very much in the way that Bollywood is moving towards the sort of the image of the feminine. Next one. Baba Ambedkar, seen as 20th century Bodhicitta, a Bodhisattva declared in Sri Lanka. Now, can anyone doubt the divine Swabhava, I'm using Swabhava, of H.H. Dalai Lama? If you do, go in his presence for a short while, you'll see that it's not emptiness, but perhaps something much more. much more divine than emptiness. That's because it's there in the Buddhism, probably developed first in Buddhism. Next one. I think coming to the end. And then you have Bharat Mata. This is a painting by Abanindranath Tagore, which then gets incorporated into India as a goddess herself, right? Bharat Mata. Truth is only God, said Gandhi. But then the Indians made Gandhi into a god as well. So here Gandhi is, gods as good as Venkateshwar, the black Krishna, if you like, in the South. Next one, please. This is the last slide, I think. And then you have very modern iterations of, Purusha, Vishnu, and so forth. Satya Sai Baba claiming to be that. And our good friend Jimi Hendrix, which I think you'll find somewhat funny, but I think, it migrates. This story is actually migrates. So it's a wonderful picture. Next one, please. Okay. So here now we come to the Semitic style personalist monotheism has arrived over Ayodhya. The 20th, 21st century Indian warrior god, the political Rama, that Mueller, Hegel, Zena, V.D. Savarkar, though he himself was an atheist, now have accomplished their revenge against all earlier forms of theism, non-theism, atheism, Babel theism, polypantheism, panpsychism, and non-dualism of the Buddha, Gaudapada, Bhartrahari, Abhinav Gupta, Shankara, Sufi, Balls, Aurobindo, Parsi, Gnostic, Shaktas, Tantrikas, Yogi Bhogis, Gandhi, Aurobindo, Vedanta, all of these Babas are left aside. Now you have this 120 Bollywood style, one God claiming over all the mosques and masjids across India and so forth, deriding the ritual practices of the Vedas and so forth, incorporating some of it, but it's almost a nationalist political movement to bring in the idea of a Semitic, one personal monotheistic God. You cannot speak of emptiness now, or Purushottama nothingness, of which no smaller can be conceived. So one minute and my conclusion. So Hindu philosophy and theology toyed with the very permutation of theism, including agnosticism, atheism, non-theistic spiritualism, in the kind of pantheism and pagan animism that Indian, Nepalese, Balinese Hinduism came to embrace. But never in its history did a decisive conception of a monotheistic God emerge. And Arsizena is wrong that the theological evolutionary transition from Vedic preternaturalism, a kind of paganism for him, to the Upanishadic monoism, he's not using the word non-dualism, he's just saying just monoism, through finally to monotheism. And only just as the supreme almighty creator Godhead matures in the Bhagavad Gita. For whatever Krishna projects himself to be, the universal divinely transcendental being, Purushottama, he does not succeed in usurping Shiva and Kali and other 333,000 plus one-third gods from popular imaginary. But when Buddhism came to prominence and threatened to undermine the vestiges of Brahmanism from the extant religious practices and theological enclaves with its emptiness on transcendence without the gods of yore, and some threats that Buddha might be cast as the only omniscient deity to be regarded as the great divine replacement in Buddhist theoontology, the Brahmins were enraged, and hence they entrusted the logicians in Mithila and Navadvipa to work up an epistemological defense of their own monotheistically conceived divine that was just emerging, who would withstand the ravages of the Buddhists against the Hindu gods. It is still something of a mystery why they tended towards a full-blown monotheistic deity and not, say, pantheistic or panentheistic variety. Of course, it's there in Ramanuja, but remember, Madhava comes along and brings about the complete duality of monotheistic God. The resources for which were already in the annals and canons of the tradition. Was there pressure also from Vedanta, or did they aspire to retain their distance from Vedanta or its quaintly abstract concept of Brahman? I'm saying this is the Nyayakas part. So who were the first ones to actually develop an argument for the existence of God? So the philosophy of religion begins with the Nyaya. Monotheism might be dangerous, a dangerous turn in global theology, and has been responsible for more pestilence and religious wars than any other forms of theism and non-theistic conception of divinity, such as the idea of the one in Plotinus, the good in Plato, the deus obsconditus in Gnostic philosophers, the missing God in Heidegger and Jaspers, Hegel's God in nothingness, which I think is what it is ultimately. And he knew that it's there in Shankara as well, but he wasn't prepared to recognize that. Anyway, or for that matter, closest to our times, the idea of the supreme superconscient in Aurobindo, perhaps, and a non-violent Amida Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, that Dalai Lama propagates in India, let us say, or at least adheres to in the context of India, or M.K. Gandhi's truth as God, with non-violence as its secular spirituality. Thank you. Oh, I must play this. It's too bad. It's not. It won't. I don't know why it's not playing. But anyway, I think we're probably out of time. So let's leave some time for maybe here we are. No, it won't play. Okay, over to you folks for your.
Thank you very much, Purushottama. Thank you very much for such a nice and comprehensive talk. So we have time for questions. Okay, so Jay Mueller, it seems that you are. Oh no, you are just clapping your hands. Sorry. So is there any question?
Well, I hope so, because there are people putting comments on the chat while I was talking, which I thought was a bit distracting. But if people want to ask me a question, they can ask me now. Yeah.
Okay, so while you folks think, I have a question. Your talk was really very comprehensive. I don't know if it's a question. Yeah, perhaps you can just help me to understand your talk. Because of course you gave a very comprehensive picture of all divinities from a historical perspective, but I was thinking of, and you gave us some conclusions. I'm just trying to make sense of all this, and it seems to me that we can make sense of this, and I think people do make sense of this. I mean, within traditions. Within traditions, they put forward like a hierarchy, and they choose or they pick one of these divinities to be the supreme, and they design roles to the other divinities, and so on and so forth. But from this tradition perspective, which seems to be your perspective, which kind of philosophical points can we make? I mean, is it like a bad thing that there is such a big variety of positions, of divinities, and because it's such a big variety, or this is just a consequence of the human mind? When you take a look at like world religions, we come up with similar variety. So what's your point on that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about the human mind. I don't want to speculate that human mind is inclined, homo religiosus and so forth. That by the same token, Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins would say, the human mind is comes up with all kinds of weird things, and I don't know. I don't want to. I don't know that it's psychological. I think it's cultural. It's what happens when people people are responding to challenges in the environment, in nature, and so forth. It may be all of that, but I don't want to go there. My whole point is that you had a tradition of people who believed or imagined certain kinds of divinities, if you like, quote unquote, or certain forces in nature that they thought were were worthy of worshiping, were worthy of paying reverence to, were worthy of respecting. This is, all across the board. Aboriginal traditions, tribal traditions, and so forth seem to have had that. But what I want to say is that what's distinctive in the Indian tradition is that you had that too. But it's a very fairly sophisticated civilization that still, I'm talking about the Indus civilization, that still worshipped nature as mother. Very interesting. So it's almost like some of the Aboriginal traditions worshipping the serpent or the mother, from which the serpent mother, serpent father, you have that in the Australian Aboriginal tradition, so on. But when the Aryans, whether they come from outside or come from India, that's a debate I don't want to get into here. I have my own views on that, but they bring a quite completely different picture into the subcontinent, much larger, greater India, which was already alive, which was the picture that was already alive in Central Asia, right up to Mesopotamia, as I said, possibly also in Egypt and so on, where you have multiple deities in the skies, buried behind the forces of the universe, and so forth, that we're going to deliver some of the fruits of our action if we did the right actions. And in this case, the actions are sacrifice. From that idea of sacrifice, they came up with the idea that perhaps the whole universe is created from sacrifice. So sacrifice to the sacrifice and so forth, from which evolves the idea of gods and perhaps one world God, one supreme God that runs the universe and so on. But it's not the supreme God. That's what I'm saying. But somehow they got the idea, and we don't know, perhaps it came from, the very early, like Pythagorean type of Greeks or so forth, but there should be one, unify the whole thing. There's too much chaos, too many gods running about and so forth, fighting. You have the Asuras, the demigods and so on. So the idea of one, and from that idea of one comes Brahman. But then it was too impersonal. It was too much, it wasn't doing anything. Well, let's have Brahman create the world, like a spider weaving up. So then you get the idea of Brahman becoming some kind of a progenitor of the universe, right? And then they link in with Purushottama and so forth, which at that time were mythological, but this becomes much more literal. And then you say, oh, well, but this is too abstract, it might disappear into nothingness. So why don't we build in a personal God into that? So then you get the idea of Ishvara coming in, right? The Isha, and so on. And then other people take it on. You have in the Brahma Sutra, the Shruti tells that Brahman is the creator of the world. And so once you get the idea of the creator, you have to actually go more and more towards a monotheistic supreme God that creates the universe. Forget about Brahman after a while. Ramanuja retained Brahman, but by the time of Madhva, Brahman is becomes almost completely Ishvara, personalized, becomes, this is personalism, the beginnings of personalism in India, and then Chaitanya and other traditions. And it's also developing in popular tradition too. The Puranas, the Bhagavata tradition, the epics, the, what have you, the Dharma Shastras and so on, perhaps. And then it becomes part of the bhakti culture. You get Shaivism coming out one side, Vaishnavism coming out another side, Shakta tradition, Tantra, in Buddhism, Vajrayana, yes, but the Buddha is what gave the idea that there could be a full personal being, unconnected with Brahman, unconnected with emptiness and so forth. So I'm basically saying that the idea of the concept of God, as we always look for, in semblance to the Judeo-Christian, the Abrahamic idea of God. By the way, the coming of Islam had something to do with that as well. So Islam had also brought a personal God with it. But the Indians were aware of things that were going on. St. Thomas is said to have come to India. So everybody brought a sort of Abrahamic idea of Christian idea of God as well. St. Xavier comes, and Christians come, Portuguese come, the Dutch come, the British come. So there's been a lot of to and fro going on. So it's a migrant culture. It's culture that's imported lots of ideas and so forth, and certain general pressures and so on. So I think we have to change the philosophy of religion in the Indian context. We can't keep asking, does God exist? Is there a concept of God? Whose concept are we using here? We're using concepts that come from outside altogether. philosophers of religion don't want to deal with the idea of polytheism and pluralism. They think, well, that's just popular religion. No, it's not popular religion. These are the basic of the philosophical ideas in India from the very beginning. And that's why I bring in the Rig Veda. And there's always a spectrum of nothingness behind it. But leave that aside. That is also very, very important to deal with. But we have to acknowledge that if we're going to do philosophy of religion in the Indian context, it's going to have to be very different to the way it's been done in the West. That's why I launched the project of post-colonial philosophy of religion. And now we have the global critical philosophy of religion. I mean, you have the books on philosophy of religion right behind you. Those companions to philosophies of religion. What do? They do, as Ninian Smart rightly pointed out, non-cross-cultural philosophy of religion. They have no idea of what, Max Charlesworth, my teacher, who founded Sophia in Australia, said, what would these questions mean to an Aboriginal tradition? Somebody asked him that, and he said, whoa, I see. He's the one who translated St. Anselm's Proslogium, the ontological argument. So he turned to Aboriginal religion. He wrote a very fine book on Australian Aboriginal religion. We haven't done that even in our Indian tradition. We haven't actually written a book on philosophy of religion of India. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, yes, I completely agree. Well, I would have time for one last quick question. Otherwise,
I'm happy to take some questions, a couple more questions.
So, some more questions.
Ruth Shugaman says in the chat that
we have one question, Purushottama. Jelena, please, you can unmute yourself.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, I know you haven't really talked about it, so maybe it's misplaced a little bit, but I want to know if there is something similar in Indian culture that we call in West philosophical theism. Is there even a concept of a deity who has all these attributes that we need so that we can have problem of evil? My question actually is, can we talk about the problem of evil as we conceive it in West, in Indian context, with all these varieties of deity?
Why should we? My question: why should we? Why should we? Just because these things are talked about in the West, just because you have a rational deity and you have rational arguments and so forth, why should we expect that of Indians? Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe the concept of evil makes absolutely no sense in traditions outside of the West. As I said, even the problem of evil was conceived not to argue against God, but in the end to actually justify God. That's what theodicy means. So there is already a plan laid out that, the problem of evil is going to defend. That's why I think the Buddha started with suffering, that there is suffering. Let's deal with the problem of suffering. That might be more important. You have theory of karma there. Karma, according to the Mimamsa, answers all the questions. You don't have to worry about evil. You don't. He of course uses, yes, Kumarila Bhatta actually does use the problem of evil, if you like, but he calls it suffering rather than evil, in the way that, you have metaphysical evil, natural evil. He says, in the face of all this suffering that's going on and so forth, how could you actually believe in a God? A good God should actually do away with suffering. So you do have that. And this is a fairly rational process going on. I don't know about rationalism in the mind of God. I'm not actually quite sure, but rational approaches, if that's what your question, it's there in the Nyaya. The Nyaya actually come up with a cosmological, teleological argument for the existence of God, and it's a very complicated process of inference. If you go into Gangesha and Shiromani in Tattva-Chintamani, Raghunath Shiromani and so forth, they've actually used for both purposes to actually develop a very sophisticated form of logic, of inference, hypothetical deductive, and bits of inductive as well, because there's a question of vyapti which is closest to induction. Not entirely identical with that, but close enough to that. But they developed this sort of rational discourse so that they could both have an argument for the existence of God, but also fine-tune the whole process of argumentation. Now, the Jains also use rational discourse here, but they use that to prove the existence of souls and souls only. And somehow, you get omniscience out of that too, but I'm not quite sure how rational a concept that might be. But at least the argument for the soul is based on fairly rational perceptual arguments and so on, as you have in Plotinus and perhaps even an Aristotelian view of the soul that then comes into the medieval period and gets combined with the Neoplatonist ideas and so on. And so you get a whole kind of development going on. You get the semblance of an ontological argument in the Upanishads when they actually do talk about, conceive of that of which no greater can be conceived, and of course that would be Brahman, but also conceive of that of which no lesser can be conceived, and that also turns out to be Brahman. So, it's not developed, it's there in very suggestive forms, but the dialogues of the Upanishads are very rich. They're like the dialogues of Plato, and dialogues proceed through a fairly rational kind of interaction. The conclusions at the end may not be entirely rationally acceptable and so forth, but the processes. But I think, just come back to Jelena's concept, I think we have to be very careful when we ask these questions of another tradition. Are we again importing? Look what the Orientalists did in the 17th, 18th century. Look, Max Muller. Look at the judgments that he actually makes. He ends up at the end accepting Shankara only because you find a kind of personal God in Shankara that he thought his closest ally, who was Spinoza for Max Muller. Shankara was closest to Spinoza, but he accepted Shankara, according to Vedanta, I mean, according to Max Muller, accepted a God. And so, he's okay. He's a great guy because, he brings God into the picture. I don't agree with Max Muller on that. I have a very different reading of what Shankara does and does not do. But what the Orientalists were looking for were precisely the kinds of things that were already there in the medieval Christian tradition. They ignored a lot of the Greek semblances that were going on. It was Fritz Stahl who wrote the first book on Advaita Vedanta and Neoplatonism. Radhakrishnan makes very many gestures towards Neoplatonism in his reading of the Vedanta, which I think is commendable, but I don't think people quite understand what Radhakrishnan is doing there. So I think that, that's why I wrote the paper or the chapter on what is the subaltern of the philosophy of religion. We are the subalterns of what's called the global philosophy of religion. I mean, what is that global? It's globalizing a very standard Western philosophy of religion. No, which is why I insisted that we call our project in the US Global Critical Philosophy of Religion, so that it can have post-colonial, feminist, indigenous, all kinds of viewpoints, including, yes, Jains and Hindus and so forth, all the Indian traditions, but there are other traditions of religions, but other traditions of philosophies as well, which I think, got to be looked at. And I talked with the, I think the atheists, the so-called four atheists, they have a place in philosophy of religion. We don't leave them out because they have very, 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 very legitimate concerns and arguments which we need to listen to. So in our group, we have a lot of non-theist philosophers as well, or philosophers who are interested in non-theism. I'm not necessarily a theistic philosopher by any stretch of imagination. I'm a Mimamsaka person, a Heideggerian, and so on. So perhaps my lenses are already muddied, according to the Vedanta people in the tradition. But at least even coming from the Western tradition, I have full Western philosophical education. As great as it is in its rational forays and so forth, we leave it in logic. We leave it at modal. We leave it in metaphysics and so forth. But it doesn't have such a big role in philosophy of religion as people have made it out to be. I hope, Jelena, that answers your question. We can talk more about this. But I've written a lot I've written a lot in these areas, of course. I think
Thank
people
you.
know.
Thank you very much. You were very, very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you very much, Purushottama. I'm afraid you have to stop.
Yeah, I wanted to answer that question about somebody asked about what's the difference between panpsychism and panentheism.
Yeah. Perhaps
Maybe another
we're
talk
gonna
on
we're
Jainism.
gonna we are gonna leave some time after the whole session. So I'm sure it will
I may not be able
time
to stay on
discuss
the. I have teaching today. I have to go to class soon, so
Oh, that's so
I may
sad.
not be. So I just want to show this is my devata. That's my god there. See, isn't that beautiful? Look at the clouds formation. This is called Mount Tamalpais. The native Indians worship that mountain. So I somehow have the privilege of actually sitting right in front of that. So
Wonderful.
that's my deva.
Thank you very much, Purushottama. Thank you very much for such a nice and enlightening class. Thank you very much.
Alan,
All
good
right,
to see you.
so let's move on.
So this will develop into a paper. I will develop this into a paper. I'm saying to both Alan and to yourself, this is what's going to be the paper. But I hope it's not too heretic, and I won't be charged with blasphemy. And
but we want that. Seriously, we want that. And atheism is represented in our special ritual. Grand Opi, he's going to write a paper.
Yeah. Well, if you're happy with it, I'll develop this into a paper. Otherwise, I'll write a completely, just give you the argument for the existence of God from Nyaya.
Okay. No, that's wonderful. That's fine. It's really what we need. I mean,
okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and I'm grateful to everyone who's joined us. And I must go because I have classes today. But I'm sure you'll be enlightened further with the papers that are coming. And I know that my brother Staneshwar will disagree with me on our mutual reading of Shankara, but it's nevertheless a good challenging exercise. So I will hover there in the dialogue.
Sure. Take care, Purushottama.
Okay. Obrigado.
Bye-bye.